Skip this, and you may miss something that has been quietly building inside you for longer than you realize. Not because these words carry some unusual power over your choices, not because anything outside of you can manufacture a shift you are not ready for, but because something in you recognized this title before your mind had time to explain why. And that recognition, that small, wordless pull, is not random. There is a shift happening right now. Not in a country, not in an economy, not in some distant field of science or politics. The shift is happening in the way certain people are beginning to see themselves, in the way they are beginning to relate to what they used to call their limitations, in the way they are standing differently at the edge of what they thought was possible. This is not about positivity. This is not about motivation. This is not about a technique you apply for 30 days and then forget. This is about something older, something that has been described in 100 different languages across 100 different eras, and something that, if you stay with this message long enough, you may begin to recognize not as a new idea, but as something you already partially knew. So take a breath before we begin. Let your shoulders soften just slightly, and allow yourself the possibility that what follows is not information being delivered to you, but something in you being remembered. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. Let me tell you what I keep noticing. Not in books, not in academic papers, but in the conversations that happen after people sit with certain ideas long enough. I spent weeks, genuinely weeks, going back through the oldest recorded descriptions of human transformation. The mystical texts, the contemplative traditions, the philosophical schools that existed long before self-help became an industry. And what I found, at the center of almost every single one of them, was not a method, it was a moment. A particular kind of moment that either happens or doesn't, and when it does, nothing before it fully explains it. The traditions called it different things: awakening, gnosis, metanoia. In some schools, it was referred to as the Great Remembering. In others, simply as the Turn. But underneath all of those names was the same structural description. Something in a person, not their personality, not their habits, not their accumulated opinions about themselves, something underneath all of that begins to move, begins to orient differently, begins to see the life they have been living as something they were participating in rather than something that was simply happening to them. That is the shift. And here is what makes this moment unusual. We are living through a period in which more people are arriving at the threshold of that shift simultaneously than perhaps any other time most of us have witnessed. Not because of a single teacher, not because of a single event, but because the weight of living in a way that is misaligned with something deeper has become, for many people, no longer bearable in the ordinary way. You may know exactly what I mean. Before we continue, there's something I want to place in your hands. We've gathered the forgotten texts, the ones the Church sealed away for 17 centuries, into a single guide for those who feel the pull towards something deeper. Because whether we speak of the archons, the demiurge, or the divine spark, one truth remains. This knowledge was never meant to be lost. This is for anyone who senses there's more to this reality than we've been told, and who's ready to remember it. You'll find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here. I'll give you a moment to do that. Maybe you have had the experience of building something, a career, a relationship, a version of yourself that looked from the outside like progress and still felt, in certain quiet moments, like you were carrying it rather than living it. Maybe you have woken up on a morning that was, by any reasonable measure, fine, and still felt a kind of ache that had no obvious cause. That ache is not a malfunction. That ache is information. It is the signal that some part of you has already moved past what another part of you is still trying to maintain. One layer of you is still rehearsing the old identity, and another layer, quieter, more patient, older in some sense that is difficult to explain, is waiting. The shift is the moment those two layers stop negotiating, and something chooses, now. Before we go deeper, and we will go deeper, I want to ask you something. Not a rhetorical question, a real one. Have you ever felt, in a moment of unexpected stillness, that the story you have been telling about yourself is not entirely true? Not that it is a lie, not that your experiences were not real, but that the interpretation, the conclusion you drew from those experiences about who you are and what is possible for you is a story? One that was written, in large part, before you were old enough to know you were writing it. If even one part of you quietly said yes just now, stay with this message. What comes next is for you. There are two kinds of people who arrive at something like this. There are those who feel the slight discomfort of recognition, decide it is too uncomfortable, and return to the scrolling. And there are those who feel that same discomfort and understand, maybe for the first time with clarity, that the discomfort is not a warning to leave. It is a signal that something real is close. You are still here. That already says something. The shift begins when you stop waiting for proof that you are allowed to change and start noticing that the waiting itself is the pattern. Remember that. We will return to it. Across the contemplative traditions, the Gnostic schools, the Sufi orders, the non-dual philosophical lineages of the East, the mystical branches of the Abrahamic faiths, there is a concept that appears again and again in different clothing, but with the same underlying skeleton. It is the idea that the human being is not one thing, that within what we call a person, there are, at minimum, two distinct layers of operation. One layer is the constructed self, the identity assembled from memory, conditioning, repeated experience, and the conclusions drawn from early wounds. This layer is not bad, it is not your enemy, but it is, and this is the part that matters, a layer that was built for survival in conditions that may no longer exist. The other layer is harder to name precisely. Different traditions approached it differently. Some called it the witness, some called it the higher self. Some described it simply as awareness itself, the part of you that watches the thoughts rather than being the thoughts. The part that can observe the fear without becoming the fear. The part that knows, even in the darkest moment, that something is watching, and that the something doing the watching is not afraid. I personally think this distinction between the constructed self and the witnessing awareness beneath it is the most important idea that most people never fully encounter in their actual lives. They encounter versions of it. They read a line in a book that points toward it. They have a moment in meditation or in grief or in unexpected joy where they almost touch it. And then ordinary life rushes back in and the moment closes. But what the oldest teachings consistently said, and what is relevant right now, is that this is not a rare, mystical achievement reserved for monks or initiates. It is your natural condition. It is what you are underneath what you were trained to be. The training happened without your consent. You did not choose the family you were born into. You did not choose the early messages about whether you were safe, whether you were loved, whether you were enough. You did not choose the experiences that calcified into beliefs. That is not a judgment. That is simply the condition of arriving into a human life. You absorb the world before you have the capacity to evaluate what you are absorbing. And then, years later, perhaps right now, you begin to notice that some of what you absorbed is not serving you. That some of the filters through which you see yourself and see what is possible are not descriptions of reality. They are memories dressed as reality. Have you ever walked into a room and already known, before a word was spoken, that something was going to go wrong? Have you ever had an opportunity arrive and felt your body contract before your mind had even finished reading the situation? Have you ever received genuine warmth from another person and quietly waited for the catch? That is not intuition, that is pattern, old pattern. The constructed self, doing its job, which is to make sure the future resembles the past closely enough to feel safe. The shift begins when you can see the pattern as a pattern, not as truth, not as inevitable, as a strategy that was once necessary and has now been running on automatic for so long that you forgot you could turn it off. Now here is where the Gnostic teaching becomes particularly interesting, and this is something I spent a considerable amount of time sitting with after I first encountered it properly. The Gnostic teachers did not say that the constructed self is simply wrong and must be discarded. They said something more precise. They said that the constructed self is a kind of sleep, and that the work is not to destroy it, but to wake up inside it. To continue functioning in the world, in your relationships, your work, your daily responsibilities, while a deeper layer of awareness begins to move underneath, reorienting everything quietly, the way a compass reorients without announcing itself. The shift is not a dramatic break with the past. It is a gradual and then suddenly complete turning of attention. The shift begins when you stop waiting for proof that you are allowed to change and start noticing that the waiting itself is the pattern. Take a slow breath. Let that settle. Before this message ends, you will see 3 thresholds, not as theory, as experiences you may already be living without having named them. The first threshold is the threshold of recognition. This is the moment when you begin to see the constructed self as the constructed self, rather than as simply who you are. This sounds simple. It is not. For most people, the identity they have assembled over decades feels indistinguishable from reality. When someone challenges it, even gently, even kindly, the response is not curiosity. The response is threat. But recognition is not the same as rejection. You are not being asked to throw away everything you have built. You are being invited to notice that you built it, and that what was built can, in principle, be renovated. Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why I started the Gnostic Newsletter, a free newsletter where I go deeper into esoteric Gnostic teachings, hidden wisdom, and the mysteries we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive a Gnostic guide to mastering reality as a welcome gift, completely free. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that. What was assembled can, in principle, be reassembled differently. The question at this threshold is not, who am I really? That question is too large to answer quickly, and the mind will generate an answer that is simply another layer of construction. The question at this threshold is smaller and more useful. In this particular situation, in this relationship, in this repeated pattern, in this familiar feeling of contraction, am I responding to what is actually here, or am I responding to what I expect to be here based on what has been here before? That gap between what is actually present and what you are expecting is the threshold of recognition. And crossing it does not require a retreat or a revelation. It requires a pause. A genuine pause in which something in you chooses to look before deciding it already knows. I remember the first time this landed for me with real weight. I was in the middle of a conversation that had nothing obviously unusual about it, and I noticed, with a strange clarity, that I had already decided how it was going to end before it had actually ended. I was responding to a conclusion that had not yet arrived. And the moment I saw that, not conceptually, but felt it, something in the conversation changed. Because I changed. Because I stepped out of the pattern long enough to be actually present in the room. That is recognition. Small, quiet, completely real. The second threshold is the threshold of consent. This is the one most people skip, and it is, in my experience after years of sitting with these ideas, the most commonly overlooked threshold in all of the contemporary material on transformation and self-development. Consent means that you make a deliberate interior decision to allow the shift to continue. You might think this is automatic. If you recognize the pattern, of course you want it to change. But the constructed self is not passive. It has preferences. It has strategies it is deeply invested in. And when the shift begins to move, the constructed self will often produce very convincing arguments for why now is not the right time, why you need more preparation, why the circumstances have to be different first, why perhaps you have tried something like this before and it did not hold. All of those voices are real, and none of them are the final authority on what is possible for you. Thank the mind for trying to protect you. Then gently ask whether the old strategy still deserves to govern the entire future. Consent is not a loud declaration. It is a quiet internal turning, the equivalent of opening a window that has been closed for a long time. You do not force it open. You do not yell at it. You simply stop keeping it closed. The third threshold, and this is the one most people only approach from a distance, is the threshold of participation. Recognition sees the pattern. Consent allows the shift. Participation is what comes after. And participation does not mean effort in the conventional sense. It does not mean pushing harder or doing more. It means bringing the awareness you have begun to cultivate into contact with your actual life, your specific life, your relationships, your work, your recurring difficulties, your habitual responses when you are under pressure or in pain. Have you ever noticed how you speak when you are triggered? Have you ever caught yourself interpreting neutral behavior from someone else as rejection? Have you ever made a decision from the floor of your worst feeling and then watched it shape the next several weeks of your life? Participation is the commitment to notice. Not once, not in moments of inspiration, but consistently. Across the ordinary days and the difficult ones. Across the moments when everything in the old pattern wants to reassert itself and the quieter awareness underneath is simply watching, present, patient, and, this is the word the traditions kept returning to, awake. Attention is the gate. Awareness is the chamber. Participation is the new life that begins once you stop waiting at the threshold and step across. The shift begins when you stop waiting for proof that you are allowed to change and start noticing that the waiting itself is the pattern. And we are not done yet. What comes next is the part most people in this conversation have never fully heard before. So let us go there now. Not as a conclusion, not as a summary, as the thing itself. There is a moment, and you may have already touched it once or twice without naming it, where the shift stops being a concept you are considering and becomes something you are actually living inside of. Where the awareness you have been building, breath by breath, layer by layer, through everything we have moved through together, stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like a ground. Most people never reach this, not because they are not capable, not because the door is locked against them, but because they arrive at the edge of it and, without realizing it, they turn it into another thing to understand, another framework to carry, another idea to agree with and file away. Do not do that here. What I am pointing at right now is not a thought you add to your collection. It is a recognition you allow to land. And the recognition is this: you have never been a fixed thing, not once. Not even in the moments when the old identity felt most solid, most permanent, most undeniably you. Even then, beneath it, something was watching. Something was present that was not identical to the story being told about you. Something that the contemplative traditions across centuries and cultures kept returning to, kept pointing at with different words and different symbols and different practices, because it kept proving impossible to fully capture, and yet impossible to deny once it had been genuinely touched. Some call it the witness. Some call it pure awareness. Some call it the self behind the self. Whatever word you give it, the experience it describes is the same. A stillness that is not passive. A presence that is not distant. A part of you that has been watching the entire pattern. The contraction, the reaching, the habitual closing, the practiced hoping, without being consumed by any of it. I spent a long time not trusting this. I want to be honest about that. I came to this material, years ago now, with the particular skepticism of someone who had read enough to be cautious and lived enough to be tired of ideas that sounded profound but dissolved under pressure. I remember sitting with this specific idea, that beneath the identity I had constructed, something was already awake, and feeling, simultaneously, a pull of recognition and a strong resistance that wanted to label it wishful thinking. What shifted for me was not an argument. It was an experiment. Simple, almost embarrassingly so. I began, in moments of stress and contraction, to ask not what do I do about this, but who is the one noticing this? Not as a philosophical game, as a genuine inquiry. And what I found, not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, and then with increasing steadiness, was that the question itself created a spaciousness, a tiny but real gap between what was happening and what I was certain it meant. And in that gap, something different became possible. Not solutions, not immediate transformation, something quieter and more foundational than either of those things. Choice. Real choice. Not the choosing between options that the conditioned mind presents, but the deeper act of choosing whether to be governed by the pattern at all. I personally think this is the most underrated threshold in the entire landscape of inner work. Not the dramatic breakthrough, not the peak experience, but this quiet, repeatable, ordinary moment of the gap. The place between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl pointed toward. The space that every serious contemplative tradition, in its own language, treats as the most important real estate in a human life. Because what you do in that gap, consistently, imperfectly, repeatedly, becomes you. Not symbolically, architecturally. The neural pathways that fire together, wire together. The responses you rehearse become the responses you default to. The awareness you practice expands. The identity you choose, even in the small moments, especially in the small moments, gradually replaces the identity that was chosen for you. This is the shift. Not the one that arrives once and announces itself, but the one that is happening right now in whoever is genuinely present to this moment. And here is what I want to leave with you, not as a closing thought you pass through on the way to the next thing, but as something you actually carry. The shift you came here looking for is not waiting somewhere ahead of you. It is available in the next breath, in the next moment of noticing the contraction instead of becoming it, in the next pause before the habitual response, in the next honest acknowledgement that something in you knows more than the pattern has been allowed to express. Take a slow breath now. Let your shoulders soften. Feel the weight of your body. Notice the space behind your eyes. This awareness, the one that is reading, hearing, sensing these words, this is not a thing that needs to be built. It is already here. It has been here. And it is the most powerful shift happening right now. Not out there, not in some future version of your life, but in the quiet, undeniable, already present fact of your own watching. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. If something in this conversation landed for you, not just as an idea, but as something felt, write these words in the comments below. I am ready to live from the gap. Write it slowly, not as a declaration to anyone else, as a reminder to yourself. And if you know someone who is standing at a threshold right now, unsure whether to step across, share this with them. Not because the algorithm needs it, because they might. The shift begins when you stop waiting for permission, and it begins again every time you remember.